Welcome to my tutorial on how to paint a watercolor wreath. This is a beginner level. It's really for any level. We are going to be using more of a loose style today. If you've ever painted with me before, you know I like to use 2 water cups. I like to do this so that my colors don't get super muddy. I'm mainly going to be using a size 6 brush today. We're not going to need anything too detailed or too large because we are going to be working in a loose, kind of like no pressure style. And you're going to need a watercolor palette. We're going to be using greens and reds today. And then if you have a hard time drawing a circle, I recommend pulling a bowl out and having a pencil. And then I also like to use a paper towel just so I can dab off excess water. The first thing I want to show you guys is the basic elements that we're going to use in this wreath. So the bottom of the wreath is going to have this big bow. So I'm not going to show you how to do that because I can show you that on the paper. But a couple different elements for the leaves. So I'm just going to mix up a greenish color real quick. I just want to show you this so that when we get started, it's not like, oh my gosh, what is she doing? So the first one is what I'm doing is I'm just pointing, pressing down, and then pulling up, pointing, pressing down, and pulling up. So we'll do a series of leaves like this. Then we are going to be doing some smaller leaves. And for the smaller leaves, I'm literally just pressing this down like this. And essentially we're going around just like a little line. So we're just pressing down. So those will be the smaller leaves. And then we're gonna be making berries. We're gonna be doing big berries and smaller berries, but those will just be using the tip of your brush, pulling around into a circle and usually leaving a little white in between. So these are the basic shapes or the basic elements that we're gonna be adding to our wreath. I think there might be some instances where we add in maybe a longer leaf. So we're just using that same technique. But I just wanted to show you guys the basics so when we get started, it's not a huge mystery. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is let's draw that circle with our bowl. Oh, and I don't know if I mentioned it, but obviously we're gonna need watercolor paper. Please make sure you're using watercolor paper. A lot of times people aren't using watercolor paper and they're wondering why their artwork's turning out so bad, and that's because they're not using the right paper. So I'm drawing a circle very lightly. And then this is actually a little too big. So let me see. I'm actually gonna make it more this size. My table right now is full of decorations from the holidays, so I could just easily pull this out. Okay, you want your circle to be just a little bit smaller because we wanna make it nice and fat, and if I would have kept this larger circle, it would have been hitting the edge here. And I'm just lightly erasing this. Whenever you erase on watercolor paper, it's good to use a gum eraser and to press down and pull up. That way you're not removing the texture of your paper. Okay, that's good enough. So we have our basic circle, and down here, what I wanna do is I wanna make a bow, and I want the bow to be kind of big. The first thing I'm gonna do is draw that center part where it's kind of like a knot. So basically like a circle, but then the 2 side edges are kind of pulled in. Then I am going to just come out in this kind of curve it in, and then go back up here. I am going to make this curve in right here, like, you know, when the bow folds over. So this we're actually gonna leave white, and then we're also, where there would be folds in the, you know how there's like when you tie a bow, there's folds in the center. I'm going to make really thin lines because I'm gonna leave these lines white. And the reason I'm doing that is because we are working with a loose style. If we were doing a lot of layers, then I can come in here and add shadow upon shadow upon shadow. But we are not doing that today, so I wanna make sure we leave those areas white. Then where that bow comes out, I'm going to just make that. Man, I'm having a hard time today. Okay, let's try that again. So the end of the ribbon usually has those two little triangles. And then I'm gonna do the same thing over here, but just make it slightly different. So maybe it slides down a little bit or it's more up. You just don't want it to look exactly the same because then it looks too perfect. Okay, and make sure you have those little areas that we're gonna leave white. Okay, that looks good. And we are not going to draw the rest of our wreath. I only wanted to draw the bow just so it's really clear where the bow will be. And we are going to start, I'm actually not gonna start with the bow because if I start with the bow, I'm right-handed and I'm going to end up putting my hand in it. We are going to mix up some greens. I am a fan of bright colors. I'm using sap green right here. I'm probably gonna add some yellow to it. Mix up a good amount of colors. You don't wanna be having to remix when you're painting. Make sure to mix up a lot. If you don't have sap green, just mix up a green that has a good amount of yellow in it. You can always add yellow, of course. You could also, if you don't have a green, you can do blue and yellow. Hopefully you have a green though. I have so many greens. All right, we have our yellowy green, and then I would like something that is a little richer in color. Either grabbing a blue, maybe a little bit of red, or if you do have that green that's richer in color, just grabbing that. Color is a whole nother level when you're getting into watercolor painting and you're trying to up level your artwork, knowing the colors that go well together, even when you're working with shades. So like shades of green, that's something that I've been working on lately. This is a darker green. Mix up a darker green, but not too muted because we're using a lot of bright colors today, but we do want something that is a little bit darker. Maybe it has a tinge more blue. Okay. All right, so we have our basic greens, and then we're going to need red. I have Scarlet Lake right here. It's really bright red. And as you can see, I don't know if you guys can see this, but my water cups, I am making sure that my cool colors stay in one cup and my warm colors stay in the other. That way my colors stay super bright. Otherwise you're just gonna get brown water. We have our red, Scarlet Red, which is fantastic, but we don't want this to look really flat. And the way we're gonna do that is we're also going to mix up a red that's a little bit darker. And I'm just grabbing some indigo paint and that same red, just mixing it up a little bit. And I think it might be kind of cool to add in some brown branches every now and then. I'm a big fan of nature and I like that look. This is, I honestly don't know what red this is. I think this is sienna. And then this is, I believe, Van Dyke brown. A yellow ochre also would be a great addition. My yellow ochre is just almost gone. It's very popular. I paint a lot of dogs, so yellow ochre is a big one I use when I paint dogs. And if you want to mute this down a little bit, just grab a little bit of your green and it'll mute it down. Maybe actually a little blue too. And that will be our little sticks that we want to put in there. Okay, so now that we have all of our paint ready to go, we are going to start. And we're gonna start with that greeny yellow. And you never want your brush dripping with water. If it's doing that, make sure you just dab it on a paper towel. And we are going to start with that pointed brush. So I'm pointing down and then I'm pressing down. So the belly of my brush expands. Then I'm pulling up to a point, and I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side, and I'm gonna leave a little white in the middle. And there is our first leaf. If you want to add a little darker color to this, just tap in that color. Again, we're using a really fluid, loose style. We're not doing a layered style. So this is all about just having fun with it. I'm gonna make another leaf, same thing. It's a little bit lighter. You don't have to follow me exactly. Of course, you never have to do that. But I am going to paint it a certain way, obviously. But your leaves don't have to be exactly where my leaves are. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go around, and I wanna make this look, I think what I'm gonna do is paint my biggest leaves all the way around, and then I'm gonna go back and fill in. That's how I like to do it. Make sure you're alternating colors. You don't wanna do the same color leaf all the way around, or it's gonna look really boring. You can also go over the other leaves and let them bleed. Okay, I know I said that I was gonna go all the way around here, but I don't think I'm gonna do that actually. I think I am going to just paint in sections, because what's gonna happen is we're not gonna get that really cool bleed that I wanna get. So pick up some red, and we're gonna do our first berries. And I am going to just, with the point of my brush, I'm lightly touching that green so I get a nice bleed. And I'm just drawing a little circle. I'm gonna rinse off my brush. I'm gonna get basically just water. And I'm going to use the tip of my brush and lightly touch that other berry and go in that same circular motion. So now I have that kind of bleeding into itself. And then I want a darker berry. So I grabbed that darker paint, but I'm only going to touch it on one edge. Leave a little gap here. Okay. And then maybe I want to do that over here. It's gonna touch, that's okay. Now let's grab a different shade of green. Let's do those little tiny leaves. I'm going to draw a nice thin line with the tip of my brush. Then with the tip, I'm just pressing down, and I'm going to get these little teeny leaves. And I can press over that other leaf. Do one over here. And we're gonna come back and add a little bit more color to these. Okay, now grab that darker green and just lightly tap in some areas. Doesn't have to be right where mine are, because it's going to bleed nicely. Okay, and then we just keep going along our way, grabbing red again. Put some berries over here. Maybe it's just one big berry, and then putting just some little dots here and there. You don't want our brush to be bleeding or to be dripping with water and paint. That's way too much paint if that's what's happening to you. Have this one come like this. That one's pretty dark. And since there's not that same dark color down here, I'm going to add that in. With a loose style, it's really about exploring and just having fun with it. Don't be too hard on yourself. Gonna add in some berries, let it touch, getting a nice bleed, putting a little more red in that one. Back to those thinner branches, those little leaves. And I'm just pressing down. And maybe some of them are going upwards, some of them are going downwards. Beautiful. This is all pretty wet in here. I do want to add in a little bit more to make it thick, but I don't want it to bleed so much that it just looks like a mess. I'm gonna keep going and we can come back to it later. Making another berry. Doing some leaves. If you have a hard time painting around in a circle, you can always move your paper unless you have your paper taped down. If you aren't working on a watercolor block, I really suggest having your paper taped down because we're using a lot of water and your paper will buckle if it's not taped down or it's not on a watercolor block. Make sure you're using a good amount of water so things flow nicely. And we're following our circle. Don't be afraid to touch the other leaves when they're wet. Also, don't be afraid to maybe dot in some darker shades or lighter shades if you want. Grab that darker shade again for those little leaves. I'm doing this tutorial in December of 2022, and I don't know how many tutorials I have now. There's a lot. Sometimes, like that was a mistake right there. It doesn't look good. That's okay. Gonna add in a berry here, let it bleed. Going to get just a really unsaturated red and make a little berry. Go. I really love it when the colors bleed into themselves. If you've done my other YouTube tutorials or taken any of my classes on Skillshare, you know that I typically work in a really layered style. And I like doing this style every once in a while because it's kind of relaxing. I feel like there's less pressure, but I can definitely think about it too much and then I stress myself out. But when I allow myself to just kind of create, it's a very enjoyable experience. I also love painting in a layered style. It's not stressful for me to paint in a layered style, but it's definitely different. You really only go over something one time instead of over and over and over again. bring that red back in there, and then we just tap. Ooh, that really, so if you do that and you're like, whoa, I don't want that much red on my leaves, you can rinse off your brush and just dab it on your paper towel so it's mostly dry. And then you just take your brush and press it down, and it'll allow you to pick up some of that color. I actually like that and I'm okay with it, so I'm gonna let it live. But if you do something like that and you don't like it, then you can totally just pick it up like that. It's called pulling a highlight, essentially. That's what you're doing. And whenever you feel like it, if you want to add some darker tones in, anything that's still wet, you can just lightly tap and it'll add in like a nice color, and it will, because it's wet, it bleeds into it and it looks a lot softer. So we're just going around and making sure that we're creating symmetry, essentially. It doesn't have to be perfect. It never has to be perfect, but we do want it to at least guide your eye around, because you don't want it to be like this side is super fat and loose and this side is all tight, which I can see that it's starting to get tight over here. So how I'm going to work around that is just to bring a leaf out here into the middle. And then making sure that something comes out here. It's a balancing act. And I did these tiny berries over here and then I didn't do them again. I'm gonna make sure that I add in some of those smaller berries because we want symmetry. Perfect. And it looks like I have some darker leaves on the left side, but not really on the right side. I'm gonna add in some of those now. Definitely need a red berry in here. It's gonna bleed a lot, but that's okay. Maybe something coming out here. Since I really tightened up the wreath over here. That, I know for my own painting, that tends to happen. I don't know why. But it's okay because it's an easy fix. All right, we're almost there. So do one out here, like that, and then a leaf coming in here. And I'm definitely going to add, like, poke in a darker color. It just looks a little plain. Now this one's totally dry and it needs my help to move that paint around. All right, I'm gonna add some leaves back here just because, why not? Why not? Okay, maybe a berry. And lastly, just another one of those little branches. Okay, now we had that brown and I want to add in just a couple little areas of twigs. And I have my size 6 brush still and I'm just using the tip of it. And the paint is pretty saturated. It's not super watery. And I'm just gonna lightly draw a line with a couple branches coming off. Just where I think it might need it. You could also make it a little bit darker, just here and there. It's also a way for me to loosen this up over here. Okay. Maybe one in here. Awesome. Now the last thing we need to do is our bow. And for the bow, we are going to grab that red color. And remember that we need to make sure we leave some white areas where the fabric would essentially fold over. I'm just basically outlining around those white areas. This paint is really saturated. So just kind of make an outline. And then what I'm gonna do is just grab water and fill it in. But leaving those white areas. And then it kind of just does the work for you. So do the same thing and pretty saturated. Rinse off your brush, just add water. It's pretty light over here. And then for these guys, where they touch, I'm gonna leave a little white space so it doesn't look like a big blob. Same thing over here. Just come in. And the last thing I'm gonna do for this bow is grab a darker red, like pretty saturated, maybe add a little blue to the red. And then I'm just going to poke in some of that. And when it dries, it'll look really cool. Especially where there would be shadows. So under here, there would be shadows. And since our bow looks so red, I'm gonna go back into some of these berries and grab that Scarlet Lake and just give them a little zhuzh. So I'm not painting the whole thing, I'm just adding in a little bit of paint because they looked really muted because the green bled into them so much. And I don't want the bow to overtake the whole painting. And maybe adding in a couple more if you guys want of those little berries. And there we go, our beautiful wreath. This would be awesome to use for Christmas cards or gift tags, or you could totally frame it and give it to somebody. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you are on Instagram, please tag me and show me your artwork. I love to see it. You can tag me and follow me at Lavender and C. Also, if you like my YouTube channel and you like this tutorial, please like this video and subscribe. That way you will be notified when I have new tutorials. I hope you have an awesome holiday season and a wonderful day.